Around 3 million years ago, ocean temperatures dropped in ways that reshaped entire ecosystems. Currents shifted, coastlines changed, and the balance between predators and prey began to move. One of the largest hunters ever to exist vanished from the fossil record during this period. Its teeth stop appearing in younger layers of sediment across multiple regions at nearly the same time. Something that once dominated open water was no longer there. In the same span of time, another pattern becomes visible. A different set of teeth begins to appear more often in coastal deposits formed after the cooling intensified. Broad, triangular, built for cutting, a lineage expanding into space that had been left behind. The ocean does not remain unbalanced for long. When a top predator disappears, prey populations shift, movement patterns change, entire coastlines begin to behave differently, even without direct contact. A gap forms, and something moves toward it. The animal that filled that role was not the largest hunter in the sea. It did not overpower everything around it through size alone. It solved a different problem. Modern great white sharks can grow beyond 20 feet in length and weigh more than 2,000 kilograms. They target marine mammals with high energy value, often in cold, nutrient-rich waters where few competitors can operate with the same efficiency. They do not need to hunt constantly. Their presence alone alters how seals move, where they gather, and when they surface. This kind of influence has a name in ecology, a trophic cascade, where a predator shapes an ecosystem simply by existing within it. But this position was not always theirs. The structure of the ocean had to change first. The prey had to shift. The conditions had to narrow into something very specific. But before we dive in, where are you listening from right now? And what kind of place are you in as this plays? Let me know in the comments. At some point in Earth's recent past, a space opened at the top of the food web. Now, let's step into how it was filled. Power in the ocean is not held in a single body, but in a pattern that stretches across layers of life. It forms slowly, shaped by countless exchanges of energy, each transfer quiet and precise. Light touches the surface, drifting downward in fading bands, feeding the smallest organisms. From there, movement begins, passing from one form to another, rising through a structure that is never seen in full, yet always present. At the base, microscopic life gathers energy from the sun, turning it into something that can be consumed. Small creatures feed on them, suspended in vast numbers, moving with currents that carry both nourishment and risk. Fish arrive, drawn by density, their bodies tuned to chase and filter. Above them, larger hunters move with more intention, selecting, pursuing, refining. Each level narrows, fewer individuals holding more influence, until the structure reaches its highest point. An apex predator exists at the top of this arrangement, not because it is invincible, but because nothing regularly feeds on it. Its role is defined by position rather than dominance alone. It receives energy that has already been concentrated through many steps, allowing it to act with fewer movements, fewer decisions, and greater consequence. Its presence shapes the flow beneath it, even when it remains distant or unseen. In this structure, control does not require constant action. A predator does not need to consume large numbers to create change. The possibility of its presence alters behavior in ways that ripple outward. Prey adjust their routes, avoid certain depths, gather in different formations. These adjustments influence what they consume and where they consume it, which in turn affects the organisms below them. A chain of responses unfolds, not through force, but through awareness. This process is known as a trophic cascade, though it unfolds without urgency or sound. It is a quiet reorganization of movement and choice. When a top predator occupies its place, the system beneath it tends to balance, not through stability, but through continuous adjustment. No layer remains static. Each responds to pressure from above and availability from below, creating a living network that shifts with time and condition. Hierarchy in the ocean is not rigid, yet it is essential. Without it, energy disperses unevenly, allowing certain populations to expand without restraint. When that happens, resources become strained, habitats change, and the delicate spacing between levels begins to collapse. The absence of a guiding presence at the top can be felt in places far removed from it, in altered coastlines, in shifting schools, in the silence of areas once full. Size alone does not determine placement within this structure. A large body requires more energy, more frequent intake, and often more stable conditions. If the environment changes, that size can become a limitation. Efficiency, by contrast, allows an organism to operate within narrower margins. It can move between conditions, select higher value prey, and conserve energy over longer intervals. This balance between intake and expenditure defines success more clearly than scale. An apex predator, then, is not simply the largest hunter, but the one most precisely aligned with its environment. Its design reflects the conditions it inhabits, its strategies shaped by the availability and behavior of prey. It does not dominate through constant exertion, but through timing, positioning, and restraint. Its influence is measured not by how often it acts, but by how deeply its presence is felt across the system. In the ocean, thrones are not constructed from strength alone. They are built from relationships, from the steady flow of energy, and from the subtle adjustments that pass between species. When all parts align, a single organism can sit at the top without ever needing to claim it. There is a point in the geological record where presence fades into absence, not gradually, but with a quiet consistency that spans oceans. Layers of sediment that once carried a familiar shape begin to change. Teeth that were once abundant, scattered across coastlines and deep basins alike, become increasingly rare. Then, across multiple regions, they stop appearing altogether. These teeth had endured long after the bodies that carried them were gone, preserved through pressure and time. They marked the passage of a hunter that moved through warm seas with immense reach. For millions of years, their pattern remained steady, embedded in ancient shorelines, river deposits, and offshore beds. Then, within a relatively narrow window, that pattern thinned and vanished, leaving only older strata as evidence of what had been. At the same time, the ocean itself was shifting. Temperatures were no longer as stable as before. Cooling trends moved through surface waters, altering currents that once carried warmth across vast distances. Regions that had supported dense populations of large marine life began to change in subtle but persistent ways. Nursery grounds, once held within protected warm shallows, became less reliable. Seasonal fluctuations grew sharper, and the margins that had once supported early growth began to contract. For a predator built on scale, these changes carried weight. A large body requires consistent intake, a steady flow of high-energy prey to sustain movement and growth. When that supply becomes uncertain, the balance between energy gained and energy spent begins to narrow. Each hunt must return more than it costs, and the margin for error becomes thinner with every shift in the environment. Prey species that had once been abundant in warmer waters also began to decline or relocate. Large marine mammals and other sizable organisms adjusted their ranges, following cooler currents or moving toward regions that better supported their needs. As they shifted, the spaces they left behind did not fill with equivalent alternatives. The density of high-energy targets became uneven, scattered across distances that required greater effort to traverse. In this changing landscape, size no longer offered the same advantage. What had once allowed dominance across open water began to demand more than the environment could consistently provide. A body designed for power became a structure that required constant support, and when that support faltered, the system it depended on began to weaken. Fossil layers from this period reveal an overlap, subtle but persistent. As the larger form recedes from the record, another begins to appear more frequently in younger deposits. These teeth are different in proportion, smaller yet shaped for precision. Their distribution expands along coastlines and into regions where conditions had shifted toward cooler, nutrient-rich waters. The timing does not suggest a sudden replacement, but a gradual transition, one presence fading as another becomes more established. The disappearance was not marked by a single event. No boundary line in the sediment declares an end. Instead, there is a quiet withdrawal, a thinning that continues until absence becomes complete. Across continents and oceans, the same pattern holds, suggesting a change not confined to one region, but carried by the ocean itself. When a structure at the top of the food web dissolves, the effects move downward, reshaping relationships that had long been stable. Prey species expand into spaces once limited, altering their movements and densities. Other predators adjust in response, some increasing in number, others shifting their strategies. The balance does not collapse, but it changes, redistributing influence across the system. In this way, the ocean does not leave a void unaddressed. It allows space to open, shaped by the absence of what once occupied it. Within that space, new forms begin to align with the conditions that remain. The throne does not stand empty in a visible sense, yet its former occupant is gone, and the structure that supported it has already begun to rearrange itself. Along certain coasts, where cold currents rise from depth and spread across the shallows, life begins to gather in dense, repeating patterns. These upwellings carry nutrients that have rested far below, lifting them into sunlight where microscopic growth accelerates. What begins as a faint bloom becomes a foundation, feeding small organisms that multiply in drifting layers, drawing fish into tight, shifting formations. The water, once sparse, thickens with movement. In these regions, the boundary between open ocean and land becomes a place of unusual abundance. Rocky outcrops and isolated islands offer surfaces where marine mammals haul themselves from the water, forming colonies that expand as food remains consistently available nearby. Seals, in particular, begin to increase in number, their populations supported by reliable feeding grounds and protected spaces for rest and reproduction. Generations settle into these locations, returning with a regularity that creates predictable rhythms along the coastline. As the climate continues its gradual cooling, these temperate zones become more stable than the warmer regions that once held greater diversity. The shift does not remove life, but it redistributes it, concentrating energy into narrower bands where conditions align. Within these bands, the presence of marine mammals introduces a new kind of resource, one that differs from the fish and smaller prey that dominate elsewhere. A seal carries energy in a form that is both dense and efficient. Beneath its skin lies a thick layer of blubber, rich in lipids, designed to retain heat in cold water. This tissue stores far more energy than muscle alone, offering a concentrated return for any predator capable of accessing it. A single, successful hunt can provide sustenance that lasts far longer than multiple pursuits of smaller prey, reducing the need for constant activity. This shift in available energy begins to favor a different approach to survival. Instead of continuous movement through open water in search of scattered targets, there is advantage in patience, in precision, and in the ability to exploit these concentrated sources. The coastline, once a boundary, becomes a focal point, where timing and positioning matter more than distance covered. Within this changing structure, opportunity does not appear as an empty space, but as a pattern waiting to be used. The growing seal populations move in predictable ways, entering and leaving the water along familiar paths. Their bodies, adapted for insulation and endurance, carry the energy that the surrounding system has gathered and stored. To access this energy requires more than size. It requires alignment with the conditions that make these gatherings possible. At the same time, the productivity of upwelling zones ensures that these systems remain active. Nutrients continue to rise, supporting the base of the food web and maintaining the density of life that sustains higher levels. The entire structure becomes anchored in these regions, creating points of stability within a broader ocean that is still adjusting to change. In this environment, the advantage shifts toward those that can balance energy intake with minimal expenditure. Speed over short distances, the ability to remain unseen until the final moment, and the capacity to extract the most valuable portions of a catch all become defining traits. The predator that thrives here is not the one that consumes the most, but the one that wastes the least. What emerges is a different kind of dominance, shaped not by overwhelming force, but by efficiency within a specific context. The ocean, in its gradual transformation, does not favor excess. It refines, selecting for forms that fit the patterns it has created. Along these coasts, where cold water meets rising life, the conditions narrow toward a solution that rewards precision over scale and strategy over size. A body takes shape not all at once, but through small adjustments carried across generations, each one narrowing the gap between effort and reward. Along the temperate margins where energy gathers in concentrated forms, this shaping becomes especially precise. The result is not excess, but alignment, a structure tuned to conditions that favor short bursts, controlled movement, and decisive contact. The form that emerges is streamlined, built around a dense core of muscle that tapers smoothly toward both ends. Its outline reduces resistance as it moves, allowing water to pass along its surface with minimal disruption. Every contour contributes to this efficiency, from the pointed snout that parts the flow ahead to the crescent tail that converts stored energy into sudden acceleration. Movement is not constant, but when it occurs, it unfolds with remarkable clarity, each motion translating directly into forward force. Beneath the surface, a different refinement supports this external design. Unlike many other fish, this animal maintains warmth within key muscle groups, retaining heat generated by activity rather than losing it immediately to the surrounding water. This internal warmth allows muscles to contract with greater power and consistency, even in colder conditions where others would slow. Circulatory pathways act as a subtle exchange system, keeping vital regions insulated while the outer body remains in balance with the environment. This ability changes how it interacts with its surroundings. In cooler waters, where prey gathers and remains active, sustained performance becomes possible. Speed is not lost to temperature, and control remains steady, even after periods of stillness. The body can remain poised, conserving energy, then release it in a brief, focused burst without delay. Coloration adds another layer to this design, though it appears simple at first glance. The upper surface carries a muted tone that blends with the darker hues of the water when viewed from above. Below, a lighter underside merges with the brightness filtering down from the surface. This contrast creates a form of concealment known as countershading, where the body becomes less distinct against its background depending on the angle of observation. From beneath, it dissolves into light. From above, it merges with depth. In the context of coastal hunting, This subtle feature becomes highly effective. Prey moving near the surface relies on limited perspectives, scanning for shapes that interrupt familiar patterns of light and shadow. A form that aligns with those patterns can approach more closely before detection, reducing the distance needed for a successful strike. The final movement, when it comes, is already within a range where reaction time offers little protection. The jaws themselves reflect the same principle of efficiency. Broad teeth, edged and triangular, are arranged to cut rather than hold. When contact is made, the initial bite removes a portion rich in energy, allowing the predator to withdraw rather than engage in prolonged struggle. This approach reduces the risk of injury and limits the energy spent in each encounter. The body is not built for grappling, but for precision, entering and leaving the moment with minimal loss. All of these elements work together within a narrow window of opportunity. The presence of high-value prey near the surface, the cooler temperatures that define these regions, and the need for rapid, controlled action create a specific set of demands. The design that meets them does not rely on overwhelming size, but on the balance between structure and strategy. In this alignment, movement becomes deliberate, shaped by conditions that reward timing over persistence. The body carries within it a record of these conditions, each feature reflecting a solution refined over time. Along the coasts, where energy concentrates and life gathers in repeating cycles, this form moves with quiet purpose, fitted closely to the world it inhabits. Stillness settles beneath the surface, long before any movement begins. Depth holds a quiet that is not empty, but measured, layered with faint currents and distant motion. Within this space, a body aligns itself along a vertical path, suspended below the brighter water above. There is no immediate rush, only a gradual positioning, a subtle adjustment of depth and angle that brings the surface into view as a shifting ceiling. Above, silhouettes pass across the light, distorted by ripples and the constant motion of the sea. From below, these shapes are defined by contrast rather than detail, dark forms crossing a pale field. Distance becomes a matter of perception, judged through changes in size and clarity. The hunter remains outside that field of recognition, held within darker water where its outline dissolves. When the moment aligns, motion begins without hesitation. Muscles contract in a coordinated sequence, releasing stored energy through the length of the body. The tail drives downward and then upward in powerful strokes, converting stillness into rapid ascent. Acceleration builds quickly, each movement adding to the last, until the body is moving through the water column with focused intent. This vertical approach reduces the time available for response. Prey near the surface are oriented horizontally, their attention directed outward rather than downward. The angle of attack exploits this limitation, arriving from a direction that remains largely unobserved until the final instant. By the time the disturbance reaches them, the distance has already closed. Water compresses along the leading edge as speed increases, then parts as the body breaks through the surface. In some locations, this motion carries the entire form into open air, a brief emergence that reflects the momentum generated below. The breach is not an act of display, but a continuation of the same movement, the upward force exceeding the resistance of the surface layer. Certain coastlines have become known for these events, where conditions bring predator and prey into repeated alignment. Along parts of South Africa, near islands where seals gather in large numbers, clear water and predictable routes create a setting where vertical ambush occurs with consistency. Similar patterns appear off California and in regions of southern Australia, each shaped by local conditions, yet bound by the same underlying structure. The energy required for such an ascent is significant. A rapid acceleration through several meters of water, followed by the potential to leave it entirely, demands a precise calculation between cost and return. Not every attempt results in a successful capture, and each effort draws from reserves that must be replenished. This balance shapes the frequency of the behavior, limiting it to moments when the probability of success is high. When contact is made, the encounter is brief. The initial strike delivers force and removes a portion of tissue rich in stored energy. The predator does not remain engaged longer than necessary, allowing the prey to weaken while conserving its own resources. In many cases, it will circle back once the movement above has diminished, returning to feed with minimal resistance. This method reflects an adaptation to a specific type of prey. Marine mammals, with their insulating layers and surface-oriented habits, create opportunities that differ from those found in open water hunting. The vertical ambush aligns with these patterns, using depth as concealment and speed as the means of access. Each element supports the others, forming a sequence that unfolds with quiet precision. Beneath the surface, the cycle resets. The water closes again, returning to its previous calm, as if the motion had only passed through it without lasting trace. Within that calm, the structure of the hunt remains, ready to form again when conditions align. Before any movement forms, a field of information surrounds the hunter, subtle and continuous, woven through water that appears empty at first glance. Signals pass in every direction, carried not by light alone, but by faint currents of energy and motion. Within this field, perception does not depend on a single sense, but on the quiet blending of several, each contributing a layer that refines the whole. Electrical traces drift outward from living bodies, minute discharges produced by muscle activity and the steady rhythm of internal organs. These signals are weak, quickly absorbed by the surrounding water, yet they persist long enough to be detected by specialized receptors arranged across the surface of the head. Known as the ampullae of Lorenzini, these structures register differences in electrical potential, translating them into a spatial awareness that extends beyond sight. A hidden body, even one lying still, carries within it the pulse of its own function, a pattern that can be sensed at close range. This form of perception does not create an image in the conventional sense. It provides a map of presence, a way to locate living tissue when other cues are limited or absent. In conditions where visibility fades, where suspended particles scatter light or depth reduces clarity, this electrical sensitivity continues to operate, unaffected by darkness. The faint beat of a heart, the contraction of muscle beneath skin, all contribute to a signal that cannot be concealed entirely. Along the length of the body, another system responds to motion rather than energy. The lateral line, a series of fluid-filled canals embedded beneath the skin, detects changes in pressure and vibration. As water moves around objects, it carries patterns that reflect their size, speed, and direction. Even slight disturbances, created by a turn or a shift in position, ripple outward and are received as variations along this line. Through it, the hunter perceives movement at a distance, sensing the approach or retreat of other bodies without direct contact. These signals combine with vision, which operates within its own range of strengths. From below, the surface appears as a shifting boundary of light, broken by silhouettes that pass across it. The eye is adapted to detect contrast within this field, distinguishing darker shapes against a brighter background. Fine detail is less important than clarity of outline, allowing recognition of form even when distance or distortion reduces precision. The upward gaze becomes a window through which targets can be identified before other senses take precedence. Each of these systems contributes independently, yet they are not used in isolation. Information overlaps, reinforcing certain signals while filtering others. A disturbance in the water aligns with a change in light above, while an electrical trace confirms the presence of living tissue within that form. Together, they create a layered perception that reduces uncertainty, guiding movement with a quiet accuracy. As distance closes, the balance between senses shifts. Vision may initiate awareness, but electrical detection refines the final approach. The lateral line continues to register motion, adjusting for changes that occur in the last moments before contact. No single input dominates. Instead, the combination allows for a continuous update of position and timing. This integration supports a method of hunting that depends on precision rather than repetition. Each attempt is shaped by the information gathered beforehand, reducing the need for correction once movement begins. The body does not rely on chance encounters, but on a gradual narrowing of possibility until the path forward becomes clear. Within the water, this awareness remains largely invisible, leaving no trace beyond the outcome it produces. Signals pass, are received, and are acted upon without disturbance to the surrounding field. The hunter moves within this network of information as part of it, guided by currents that carry more than motion alone. Across distant shorelines, separated by entire oceans, a similar trace begins to appear within younger layers of rock. It is not a single discovery, but a pattern repeated from one continent to another, embedded in coastal sediments that formed under shifting climates. These remains, carried by time and pressure, mark a widening presence, one that follows the edges of land rather than the vast interior of open water. Along the western coasts of North America, deposits reveal a growing concentration of these forms, appearing in sequences that suggest repeated occupation. Far to the south, near the tip of Africa, comparable records emerge within sediments shaped by cold currents moving upward from depth. In southern Australia and along parts of South America, the same distribution unfolds, each location reflecting a similar alignment of conditions. The pattern does not spread evenly across all seas, but gathers within temperate zones where environmental stability meets seasonal variation. These regions hold a particular balance. Waters are neither too warm nor too cold, allowing for a mix of productivity and predictability. Nutrients rise along continental margins, supporting dense networks of life that extend from microscopic growth to larger, more complex forms. Within this layered system, marine mammals establish themselves along coastlines, returning to the same locations across generations. Their presence becomes fixed in space, anchored to islands, reefs, and narrow stretches of shore. Seal rookeries form within these environments as centers of activity, places where large numbers gather for breeding and rest. Their movements follow consistent patterns, shaped by tides, currents, and the structure of the coastline itself. Over time, these locations become reliable points within an otherwise shifting ocean, offering a form of stability that can be tracked and anticipated. As these colonies expand, they influence the surrounding system. Their feeding draws energy from nearby waters, while their return concentrates that energy in a single place. The result is a localized increase in biological activity, a focal point where multiple layers of the food web intersect. Fish gather in response to increased nutrients, and other predators move through the area, drawn by opportunity. Within this structure, a larger presence begins to settle into a repeating pattern. Fossil evidence suggests not just occasional passage, but sustained interaction with these coastal systems. Teeth appear in deposits associated with shallow marine environments, indicating that these regions were not merely crossed, but occupied with some regularity. The coastline becomes more than a boundary, it becomes a domain shaped by repeated use. Temperate zones, with their balance of cold currents and productive shallows, provide conditions that favor this emerging pattern. The seasonal shifts within these waters do not disrupt the system, but reinforce it, creating cycles that can be anticipated. Prey remains available, though it moves within defined limits, and the environment supports a strategy built on timing rather than constant search. Over time, this alignment produces a form of coastal dominance that is not declared but expressed through presence. The repeated return to specific regions, the consistent interaction with local prey, and the accumulation of remains within these areas all point to a narrowing of range toward zones where conditions are most favorable. The open ocean remains part of the broader environment, yet the edges of continents become the primary stage where this presence is most clearly defined. Across these coastlines, separated by distance yet linked by structure, the same pattern holds. Life gathers, organizes, and repeats itself in ways that create stability within motion. Within that stability, a predator establishes its place, not through constant movement across all seas, but through a focused connection to regions where energy, prey, and conditions align. The shoreline, shaped by currents and time, becomes a continuous thread linking these distant points into a shared system. Far from the coasts, where patterns repeat with familiar rhythm, a different movement unfolds across open water, one that stretches beyond visible landmarks and into distances that cannot be traced by sight alone. For much of history, this movement remained hidden, inferred only through absence and return, until small instruments began to follow it in silence, recording paths that would otherwise dissolve into the vastness. Satellite tags, attached carefully and released with the animal, began to transmit positions over months and years. Each signal marked a point in a journey that did not follow the edges of land, but crossed entire basins of ocean. The tracks revealed arcs and loops that seemed, at first, without clear purpose, extending far from productive coastal zones into regions where surface waters appear sparse and uniform. In the eastern Pacific, a recurring destination emerged within these records, a region roughly midway between the North American coastline and the Central Ocean. Individuals from distant aggregation sites traveled there in overlapping seasons, converging within an area that became known as the White Shark Cafe. The name suggests familiarity, yet the place itself offers little in the way of obvious structure, no islands or shallow reefs, only open water layered with subtle gradients of temperature and depth. Within this region, movement patterns shift. Instead of long directional travel, paths become more intricate, marked by vertical excursions that rise and fall through the water column. Repeated dives suggest a focus not on horizontal distance, but on depth, where unseen layers hold varying conditions and possible resources. The behavior differs from that observed along coastlines, where interactions with prey define motion more directly. These journeys extend beyond a single region. Tagged individuals have been recorded crossing from one side of an ocean basin to another, linking distant coastlines through continuous travel. Some move between California and Hawaii, others between South Africa and Australia, tracing routes that span thousands of kilometers. These migrations do not occur randomly, but follow seasonal timing, suggesting an internal rhythm aligned with broader environmental cycles. The reasons for such travel unfold gradually through the data. Coastal zones provide concentrated feeding opportunities where energy can be acquired efficiently from local prey. Open ocean regions, by contrast, appear to serve different functions, possibly related to reproduction or other life processes that require separation from the intensity of coastal systems. The absence of frequent feeding behavior in these areas suggests that energy acquired earlier supports these extended periods of transit and activity. This separation between feeding and mating grounds creates a dynamic structure within the life cycle. Movement becomes a bridge between two distinct environments, each offering specific advantages at different times. The body carries the energy needed to traverse these distances, relying on stored reserves and efficient use of resources. Travel itself becomes part of the strategy, linking distant systems into a single, continuous range. Within the open ocean, conditions change more subtly than along the coast, yet they still provide cues. Temperature gradients, currents, and variations in depth create a landscape that is not visible but can be sensed and followed. These features guide movement across otherwise uniform expanses, shaping routes that repeat across years and generations. The paths traced by these migrations reveal a presence that is not confined to any single place. Instead, it extends across vast distances, connecting regions that differ in structure and productivity. Coastal dominance remains part of the pattern, yet it is only one aspect of a broader existence that includes long periods spent far from land. In this wider context, the ocean becomes a network of connected spaces, each playing a role within a larger cycle. Movement between them is steady and purposeful, guided by conditions that shift with time. The routes remain largely invisible from the surface, yet they persist beneath it, carried forward by individuals that move between worlds without leaving a trace behind. Time stretches differently for a hunter that does not depend on constant pursuit. Days pass without visible effort, movement reduced to slow adjustments that conserve more than they expend. Within this rhythm, action becomes selective, guided by a balance that favors restraint over repetition. Energy enters the body in concentrated moments rather than continuous intake. When a suitable opportunity presents itself, the goal is not simply to feed, but to extract the greatest possible return from a single encounter. Marine mammals provide this return in a form that requires little processing for maximum gain. Beneath their outer layers lies blubber, a dense reserve of lipids that stores energy in a compact and efficient way. A single portion can sustain metabolic needs far longer than muscle tissue from smaller prey. This preference shapes the method of feeding. Instead of consuming an entire animal immediately, the initial focus often falls on removing sections where this stored energy is most abundant. The encounter remains brief, allowing the predator to disengage before the situation becomes unpredictable. What remains may drift or sink, becoming part of the wider system, while the essential gain has already been secured. Such an approach reduces the need for frequent hunting. After a successful strike, the body enters a period where stored energy is gradually utilized. Digestion unfolds over time, and activity slows to match the reduced demand. This cycle of intake and rest allows long intervals between hunts, each one spaced according to necessity rather than opportunity alone. Within these intervals, risk becomes a central factor. Every pursuit carries the possibility of injury, and even a minor wound can alter future outcomes. In an environment where survival depends on mobility and precision, damage is not easily absorbed. As a result, encounters are chosen carefully, with attention to conditions that favor success while minimizing resistance. Prey that is too large, too alert, or positioned unfavorably may be ignored, even when it is within reach. This selective behavior reflects an underlying calculation that does not rely on conscious thought, but emerges from the pressures of survival. Energy gained must exceed energy spent, and the margin must remain wide enough to support future needs. Over time, this balance favors strategies that reduce unnecessary effort and avoid unpredictable conflict. Movement itself becomes part of this efficiency. Rather than constant travel in search of food, positioning plays a larger role. By remaining within regions where high-value prey is likely to appear, the need for extended pursuit is reduced. The body remains ready, but not engaged, conserving strength until the moment aligns with conditions that offer a favorable return. This approach differs from forms of hunting that depend on endurance or repeated attempts. Here, success is measured not by frequency, but by outcome. A single effective encounter can sustain long periods of stillness, allowing the predator to operate within a narrow range of effort while maintaining its place within the system. Over time, this pattern shapes both behavior and physiology. The body becomes adapted to periods of fasting, capable of maintaining function without constant intake. Fat reserves are stored and utilized in a controlled manner, supporting movement and internal processes during intervals when no feeding occurs. This internal stability reinforces the external strategy, creating a cycle that remains consistent across changing conditions. In this way, dominance does not arise from constant action, but from the ability to act only when necessary. Efficiency replaces excess, and restraint becomes a form of control. Within the broader structure of the ocean, this balance allows a presence that is both steady and precise, sustained by moments of gain that extend far beyond the instant in which they occur. Along coastlines, where land meets open water, another pattern begins to form, one not carried in currents or etched into stone, but held within memory and shared through stories. It gathers slowly at first, then spreads with a clarity that often exceeds the events from which it arose. The animal itself remains unchanged within its environment, yet its image begins to shift within a different kind of landscape. Encounters between humans and large sharks are recorded with increasing detail over recent decades, creating a body of data that can be examined across time and place. These records show that such interactions are rare when compared to the number of people who enter the ocean each year. Within those encounters, a significant portion involve a single investigative bite, after which the animal withdraws. The pattern suggests a form of misidentification where shapes and movements at the surface resemble familiar prey from below, especially in conditions where visibility and angle distort perception. From beneath, a swimmer or surfer can present an outline not unlike that of a marine mammal, particularly when viewed against the brightness of the surface. The initial contact, driven by a rapid approach, often ends quickly once the difference is detected. The animal does not continue the interaction, leaving the event incomplete in biological terms, yet fully formed in human experience. Despite the limited frequency of such encounters, their impact extends far beyond the moment in which they occur. In 1975, a fictional narrative reached a wide audience, presenting a version of this animal as a persistent and intentional threat. The portrayal was compelling, shaped for tension and continuity, and it entered public consciousness with a force that few natural histories achieve. From that point forward, the image of the shark became closely tied to ideas of danger that were not derived from statistical reality, but from narrative emphasis. This cultural layer begins to influence perception more strongly than direct experience. News reports, visual media, and shared accounts reinforce the association, often focusing on the rarity of the event as a measure of its significance rather than its probability. Each incident is amplified through repetition, creating a sense of frequency that does not align with the underlying data. Within this context, fear becomes part of the animal's identity, not through any change in its behavior, but through the way it is represented and remembered. The biological role it occupies remains consistent, shaped by the same ecological relationships and constraints that define its place in the ocean. Yet, alongside this role, another presence emerges, one constructed through human interpretation. This divergence between perception and data creates a parallel narrative. On one side, the animal moves within its environment according to patterns refined over millions of years, interacting with prey and responding to conditions that are largely invisible from the surface. On the other, it exists within a framework of expectation, where its actions are viewed through a lens shaped by cultural influence rather than direct observation. Over time, these narratives continue to coexist, occasionally intersecting in moments that draw attention and reinforce existing beliefs. The data remains steady, accumulating slowly, offering a consistent view of rarity and context. The perception, however, shifts more rapidly, responding to new stories and images that circulate widely. In this way, the animal becomes part of a broader story that extends beyond the ocean itself. Its presence is felt not only in the water, but in the way it is imagined from the shore. The distance between these two forms of presence remains, shaped by the difference between what occurs and what is believed, each moving along its own path without fully merging. In certain regions, the rhythm along the coast begins to change, not through gradual shifts in climate or prey, but through the arrival of another presence that alters patterns already in place. These changes are not constant, yet when they occur, they leave a distinct trace in both movement and absence, reshaping the balance that had settled into familiarity. Orcas, moving in coordinated groups, enter these coastal systems with a different form of precision. Their structure is social, built around communication and shared action, allowing them to engage in strategies that extend beyond individual effort. Within this framework, interactions with large sharks take on a specific form, one that has been documented in recent years with increasing clarity. In several locations, including parts of South Africa, individual great white sharks have been found with damage that follows a consistent pattern. The liver, rich in energy and buoyant within the body, is removed with remarkable accuracy, while other tissues remain largely intact. This outcome suggests a targeted approach, one that focuses on the most valuable organ while minimizing time spent in the encounter. The method reflects both knowledge and coordination, executed in a way that reduces resistance and risk. Following these events, a noticeable shift occurs. Areas that once held regular activity begin to fall quiet, with tagged individuals leaving the region for extended periods. The absence is not subtle. In places where sightings had been consistent across seasons, the presence of great whites declines sharply after orca activity is recorded. This pattern has been observed not only in South Africa, but also in parts of Australia and North America, where similar interactions have led to temporary displacement. The response of the sharks suggests an awareness that extends beyond immediate encounters. Movement away from these regions occurs even when orcas are no longer visible, indicating that the change is not tied solely to direct presence, but to a broader recognition of altered conditions. The coastline, once stable in its patterns, becomes less certain, prompting a redistribution of activity toward areas where risk is reduced. This shift does not remove the great white from its role, but it modifies how and where that role is expressed. Dominance in this context, is not absolute. It varies with location, influenced by the presence of other apex predators whose strategies differ in form and effect. Where orcas operate regularly, the balance adjusts, creating zones where one presence yields to another, not through constant conflict, but through the anticipation of it. The interaction between these species highlights a deeper aspect of ecological structure. Power is not fixed at the top, but moves within a network of relationships that can change over time. An apex predator may hold its position under certain conditions, yet that position remains sensitive to the introduction of new pressures or the expansion of existing ones. The system adapts, redistributing influence in response to these shifts. Even within this dynamic, the broader structure of the ocean remains intact. Prey continue to move, currents maintain their flow, and the cycles that support life persist beneath the surface. The changes occur within these cycles, altering patterns without dismantling the system itself. The presence of orcas introduces a new variable, one that interacts with existing patterns rather than replacing them entirely. Over time, these interactions become part of the evolving landscape, recorded in movement patterns and absence as much as in direct observation. The coastline reflects these changes quietly, its balance adjusted not through visible transformation, but through the shifting presence of those that move within it. In sheltered stretches of coastline where currents soften and depth rises gradually from the seabed, smaller forms move through water that offers a different kind of protection. These areas do not carry the same density of large prey found elsewhere, nor the same level of competition. Instead, they provide space, stability, and a reduced presence of larger predators, creating conditions where early life can unfold with fewer immediate pressures. These regions function as nursery grounds, though they are not marked by boundaries or fixed locations. They emerge where environmental features align: shallow waters, consistent temperatures, and access to manageable food sources. Within them, young individuals remain for extended periods, their movements contained within a narrower range compared to the expansive routes traced later in life. The coastline here becomes a place of gradual development rather than active dominance. At this stage, diet reflects both limitation and opportunity. Juveniles do not yet possess the size or strength required to engage larger prey, and their feeding focuses on smaller organisms that are abundant within these protected zones. Fish, rays, and other mid-level species form the basis of their intake, each encounter contributing to steady growth rather than immediate surplus. Energy is gained in smaller increments, requiring more frequent feeding, yet within a system that supports this continuous need. As growth progresses, the body begins to change in both proportion and capacity. Muscle mass increases, sensory systems refine, and the ability to regulate internal temperature becomes more effective. These changes do not occur rapidly. Instead, they unfold over years, each stage building upon the last. The pace is deliberate, reflecting a life strategy that prioritizes long-term stability over rapid expansion. This extended development shapes the lifespan itself. Individuals can live for several decades, moving through phases that span wide intervals of time. Maturity is reached only after many years, and even then, reproduction occurs at a rate that remains limited. Gestation periods are long, and the number of offspring produced in each cycle is relatively small. Each new generation enters the same gradual process, beginning again within the sheltered spaces that support early survival. Because of this, population growth remains constrained. Losses cannot be replaced quickly, and recovery from decline unfolds slowly, bound by the same timelines that define individual development. This limitation does not weaken the species within its ecological role, but it does shape how that role is maintained over time. Stability depends not on rapid increase, but on the continuity of individuals that persist across decades. Within nursery grounds, the presence of young forms contributes to a quieter layer of the system. They move without drawing the same attention as larger individuals, interacting with their environment in ways that are less pronounced, yet still significant. Their feeding influences local prey populations, and their gradual dispersal over time extends their presence outward into broader regions. As they mature, movement patterns begin to shift. The protected areas that once provided stability become less central, and the range expands beyond these boundaries. The transition is not abrupt, but a steady widening of activity, guided by increasing capability and changing needs. What begins in still, shallow waters eventually connects to the larger network of coastal and open ocean environments. Through this process, the structure of the population maintains itself, not through rapid turnover, but through continuity. Each individual carries forward the same pattern of slow growth and measured reproduction, contributing to a presence that persists across generations. Within this rhythm, the ocean supports a lineage that does not rush toward dominance, but arrives there through time, shaped by conditions that favor endurance over speed. Movement near the surface begins to change in ways that are not immediately visible, yet become clear over time through repetition and absence. Paths that once followed direct lines between feeding grounds and resting places begin to curve, extending outward or dipping briefly below before returning. The alterations are subtle, carried out across many individuals until a new pattern settles into place. In regions where large predators are consistently present, seals adjust how and when they enter the water. Departures from land no longer occur in steady, predictable sequences. Instead, timing becomes irregular, with pauses and sudden bursts replacing smooth transitions. Groups that once spread across open areas begin to cluster more tightly, reducing exposure by remaining within proximity to one another. The surface itself, once crossed with little interruption, becomes a space navigated with caution, shaped by experience. These changes extend beyond simple movement. Feeding behavior shifts as well, with foraging routes altered to avoid areas where risk is higher. Some individuals travel farther to reach less contested zones, while others adjust depth, diving more frequently or remaining submerged longer before returning to the surface. Each decision carries a cost, requiring additional energy or time, yet within the broader system, these adjustments help balance the interaction between predator and prey. As seals modify their behavior, the organisms they feed upon experience a corresponding change. Fish populations that once faced steady pressure in certain areas begin to recover locally, while others encounter increased attention as feeding routes shift. This redistribution does not occur evenly, but spreads through the system in overlapping waves, each layer responding to the one above it. The structure remains intact, yet its internal balance is continually refined. Habitat use also evolves under this influence. Areas that offer visual or physical complexity, such as rocky formations or irregular seabeds, become more frequently occupied, providing additional cover and variation in movement. Open stretches, once used without distinction, may see reduced activity, not because they lack resources, but because they expose movement in ways that are easier to detect. Over time, these preferences shape the distribution of life along the coastline, concentrating activity in locations that offer both nourishment and relative safety. Within this shifting landscape, the presence of the predator does not need to be constant to exert its effect. Even periods of absence carry influence, as learned behaviors persist beyond direct encounters. Seals that have adapted their patterns continue to follow them, maintaining a form of memory that extends across time. The system, in turn, reflects this continuity, holding the imprint of past interactions within present movement. This ongoing exchange forms a feedback loop, where each adjustment leads to another, creating a dynamic equilibrium rather than a fixed state. Predator behavior influences prey. Prey behavior influences the distribution of lower levels, and these changes feed back into the conditions that shape future interactions. The result is not stability in a static sense, but a balance that is maintained through continuous response. Within this balance, no single element remains unchanged. The ocean responds to presence with movement, to pressure with adaptation, and to absence with expansion. Each layer participates in this process, contributing to a system that remains fluid while retaining its overall structure. Along the coastlines where these interactions unfold, the surface may appear calm, yet beneath it, patterns are constantly forming and dissolving. The responses are quiet, carried out through countless small adjustments that together shape the behavior of entire populations. In this way, the ocean reflects not only the presence of its inhabitants, but the relationships that bind them into a single, evolving whole. No two individuals move through the water in exactly the same way. Even within the same region, patterns begin to separate, some following wider arcs, others remaining closer to familiar routes, as if each carries a slightly different interpretation of the same environment. These differences are not random. They emerge through experience, shaped by encounters that leave subtle traces in future behavior. Observations gathered over years of study reveal that learning plays a role in how these movements evolve. Individuals that encounter new situations do not respond in identical ways each time. Some adjust quickly, refining their approach after a single interaction, while others repeat patterns before shifting. This variation suggests a capacity to retain information and apply it, not as a fixed response, but as a flexible adjustment guided by prior outcomes. At certain coastal sites where feeding opportunities occur with some regularity, repeated sightings of identifiable individuals have provided glimpses into these processes. Some arrive at predictable intervals, approaching from similar directions, while others alter their timing or path, avoiding conditions that previously led to less successful outcomes. These changes are not abrupt, but accumulate over time, gradually reshaping how each individual interacts with the same setting. Differences extend beyond movement into temperament. Within shared spaces, some individuals display a greater tendency to approach closely, investigating objects or disturbances with measured curiosity. Others maintain distance, passing through without deviation, as if guided by a more cautious interpretation of their surroundings. These tendencies persist across encounters, forming patterns that resemble individual disposition rather than momentary reaction. When multiple individuals occupy the same area, particularly during periods of increased feeding activity, their interactions remain structured yet fluid. Direct conflict is uncommon, and spacing is often maintained through subtle adjustments in position and timing. One may approach while another yields slightly, creating a shifting arrangement that allows access without prolonged confrontation. This tolerance does not imply cooperation in a social sense, but it reflects an ability to navigate shared resources without constant escalation. Within these gatherings, behavior can also change in response to observation. Individuals that encounter new objects or unfamiliar situations may initially approach with caution, circling at a distance before gradually reducing that space. Over repeated exposures, responses often become more refined, suggesting an ongoing process of assessment and adjustment. What begins as uncertainty can transition into familiarity, altering how future encounters unfold. Adaptability becomes visible in these gradual shifts. When conditions change, whether through variation in prey availability or the presence of new elements in the environment, behavior adjusts rather than remaining fixed. Routes are altered, timing shifts, and approaches evolve in ways that align with the new context. These changes do not occur simultaneously across all individuals, but spread unevenly, reflecting differences in experience and disposition. The result is a population that does not move as a single, uniform entity, but as a collection of individuals, each contributing to a broader pattern while maintaining distinct tendencies. Learning and variation create a layered structure within behavior, where consistency exists alongside flexibility, allowing responses to remain effective under changing conditions. Beneath the surface, this quiet complexity unfolds without display. Movements carry traces of past encounters, choices reflect accumulated experience, and interactions reveal a balance between caution and exploration. Within this framework, intelligence is not expressed through overt signals, but through the ability to adjust, to remember, and to move through a changing environment with a form of awareness that continues to refine itself over time. Temperature does not remain fixed across the ocean, but shifts in slow, layered gradients that stretch across depth and distance. These changes, guided by currents and seasonal cycles, create boundaries that are not visible, yet strongly felt by the organisms that move within them. Some waters hold warmth that lingers near the surface, while others carry cold from deeper regions, rising and spreading along continental margins. For many species, these differences define limits. Body temperature follows the surrounding water, and as conditions cool, muscle performance declines, slowing movement and reducing endurance. Activity becomes restricted to narrower ranges, where warmth supports the energy needed for pursuit and escape. Beyond these zones, efficiency drops, and the balance between effort and return begins to shift. Within this structure, the ability to retain internal warmth changes what is possible. Through a network of blood vessels arranged to conserve heat generated by muscle activity, certain sharks maintain temperatures above that of the surrounding water. This process, known as regional endothermy, allows key muscle groups to operate with greater power and consistency, even in colder conditions. The effect is not uniform across the entire body, but focused in areas where performance matters most. This adaptation extends the usable range of the animal beyond what would otherwise be possible. Cooler waters that limit other species become accessible, opening pathways into regions where prey remains active under conditions that would slow less adapted hunters. Movement through these areas does not require constant adjustment to external temperature, allowing a steadier form of activity that supports both travel and feeding. Seasonal cycles further shape this expanded range. As surface waters warm and cool throughout the year, prey species shift their positions in response, following gradients that align with their own needs. These shifts create moving targets across the ocean, drawing predators into patterns that reflect the same seasonal rhythm. The ability to operate across a wider temperature range allows these movements to remain continuous rather than fragmented by environmental constraints. During cooler periods, when productive zones extend into lower temperatures, presence increases in regions that would otherwise remain underused. Activity follows these expansions, aligning with the availability of prey that concentrates under specific conditions. As seasons change and waters warm, movement adjusts again, tracking the shifting balance between temperature and resource distribution. This pattern of movement does not occur as a simple back and forth, but as a gradual adjustment guided by overlapping influences. Temperature, prey availability, and internal capacity interact to shape routes that evolve over time. Individuals move through these gradients with a form of consistency that reflects both the environment and their own physiological design. The advantage lies not in enduring extreme cold, but in maintaining performance where others begin to slow. This margin allows access to spaces that remain underutilized, reducing competition and aligning with prey that thrives under similar conditions. The ocean, in its layered structure, offers these opportunities unevenly, and the ability to move within them becomes a defining trait. Over time, this adaptation integrates into the broader strategy of survival. It supports long-distance travel, enables presence in productive yet cooler regions, and allows responses to seasonal change without interruption. The body carries within it a buffer against the surrounding environment, not isolating itself from it, but interacting with it on more flexible terms. Within these shifting waters, temperature becomes less of a barrier and more of a guide, shaping movement without restricting it entirely. The result is a range that expands and contracts with the seasons, following patterns that remain connected to the underlying structure of the ocean. Seen from above, the distribution appears scattered, as if presence were limited to isolated points along distant shores. Yet when these points are connected, a broader pattern emerges, tracing a continuous arc through temperate waters across multiple oceans. It is not a uniform spread, but a network of regions linked by similar conditions, each supporting a recurring presence shaped by local structure and seasonal change. In the Indian Ocean, this pattern follows coastlines influenced by strong currents that move along continental edges. Here, cooler waters rise in certain areas, creating productive zones that draw a wide range of life. The presence of large predators becomes more frequent in these regions, where prey remains available within defined limits. Movement through this ocean does not concentrate in a single location, but forms a chain of connected habitats, each contributing to a larger range that extends across national boundaries and open water alike. Along the southern tip of Africa, the pattern becomes more concentrated. Coastal features combine with nutrient-rich waters to support dense gatherings of marine mammals, creating conditions where predator activity is both visible and consistent. Islands and narrow channels shape the movement of prey, guiding them through passages that repeat across time. Within these spaces, the presence of large sharks becomes predictable, forming one of the most well-known aggregation sites in the world. The structure here reflects a close alignment between environment and behavior, where conditions support repeated interaction within a relatively confined area. Across the Pacific, along the western coast of North America, another set of locations reveals a similar concentration. In California, certain coastal regions host regular activity tied to seasonal cycles and the movement of prey. The waters here shift with changing temperatures and currents, yet within this variability, patterns persist. Individuals return to specific areas at similar times each year, suggesting a connection between environmental cues and established routes. These hotspots do not remain fixed in intensity, but they maintain a recognizable presence within the broader system. Further south, along the coast of Australia, the distribution extends into a range shaped by both eastern and southern currents. Here, Multiple regions support sustained activity, with movement linking them into a wider network. Coastal features, including reefs and offshore islands, create varied environments where prey gathers and disperses in response to local conditions. Within this diversity, a consistent presence emerges, reflecting the adaptability of the predator to different yet related settings. Across these regions, the common factor lies not in geography alone, but in the alignment of temperature, prey availability, and coastal structure. Temperate waters provide the balance needed to support both the predator and its primary food sources, while physical features guide movement and concentrate activity. Each location differs in detail, yet the underlying conditions remain similar enough to create a repeating pattern across distant parts of the world. Movement between these areas connects them into a single extended range. Individuals do not remain confined to one site, but travel between regions, linking separate coastlines through long-distance routes that follow oceanic pathways. These journeys maintain continuity across the global system, ensuring that presence is not isolated, but part of a broader, interconnected distribution. Within this network, the ocean reveals a form of structure that is both expansive and precise. Presence is distributed across continents, yet shaped by local conditions that refine how and where activity occurs. The result is a global pattern that remains grounded in specific places, each one contributing to a larger presence that spans the world's temperate seas. Long before the coastlines settled into their present forms, a lineage was already taking shape within older seas, its features emerging gradually from predecessors that moved through waters far different from those seen today. These earlier sharks, belonging to the lamnid group, carried the beginnings of a design that would be refined across millions of years, each generation adjusting in small ways that accumulated into a distinct form. Fossil records preserve fragments of this progression, most often through teeth that vary in size, shape, and structure across layers of sediment. These remains reveal a sequence rather than a single transformation, with intermediate forms bridging the gap between ancient species and those that appear later. Serrations become more pronounced, edges sharpen, and proportions shift, reflecting changes in feeding strategy and prey selection. Each variation marks a response to conditions that were themselves evolving as climates shifted and ecosystems reorganized. Among these ancestral forms, species such as Carcharodon hubbeli provide insight into this transition. Its teeth share similarities with both earlier lamnids and later great whites, suggesting a stage where features were still in flux. The body associated with these teeth likely carried a combination of traits, some suited to older environments, others anticipating the demands of a changing ocean. Over time, these combinations resolved into a more consistent structure, one that aligned closely with the conditions that would come to define temperate marine systems. This process did not occur in isolation. The broader lamnid family includes species that adapted along different paths, each responding to specific ecological niches. Some remained within open ocean environments, while others moved closer to coastal regions, where interactions with varied prey shaped their development. The lineage leading to the great white reflects a convergence of traits that favored versatility, allowing movement between different habitats while maintaining efficiency in each. As geological time advanced, shifts in temperature, sea level, and the distribution of life created new pressures that influenced this evolutionary path. Species that could not adjust to these changes gradually disappeared, leaving behind traces in older strata. Those that persisted carried forward traits that proved effective under new conditions, refining them further as environments continued to evolve. The result is not a sudden emergence, but a continuous thread of adaptation extending from ancient seas into the present. Within this thread, certain features become increasingly defined. The structure of the teeth, designed for cutting through dense tissue, aligns with the presence of larger prey. The body, shaped for efficient movement, reflects a need to balance energy use with performance. Internal systems that support temperature regulation and sustained activity emerge as part of this refinement, allowing operation across a wider range of conditions. Each of these elements develops gradually, guided by the interplay between organism and environment. The fossil record, though incomplete, offers enough continuity to trace this progression with reasonable clarity. Layers separated by time reveal a lineage that does not remain static, but evolves in response to shifting circumstances. The gaps between these layers hold transitions that are not fully preserved, yet the overall pattern remains visible, connecting ancient forms to those that move through modern oceans. Over millions of years, this lineage becomes more specialized without losing its adaptability. The balance between these qualities allows it to persist through periods of change that alter the structure of marine ecosystems. Traits that support efficiency, flexibility, and precise interaction with prey are retained and enhanced, shaping a form that reflects both its origins and its ongoing refinement. In this way, the present form carries within it a long history, each feature shaped by conditions that no longer exist, yet continue to influence its design. The ocean it inhabits has changed many times, but the lineage has adjusted with it, preserving a connection that extends far beyond the surface of today's waters. Between extremes, a narrow range persists where form and function remain in quiet agreement with the world around them. Within this range, the body is neither pushed toward excess nor reduced to limitation, but held in a balance that allows movement, feeding, and survival to align without strain. Over time, this balance becomes reinforced, not through intention, but through the steady filtering of what continues and what does not. A body that grows too large begins to carry demands that are difficult to meet consistently. Energy requirements rise with mass, and the need for reliable, high-value prey becomes constant rather than occasional. Movement, though powerful, becomes more costly, and the margin for error narrows as each unsuccessful attempt draws more heavily from reserves. When conditions shift, whether through changes in temperature or the distribution of prey, this dependence on scale can become a limitation, reducing flexibility at the very moment it is most needed. At the opposite end, a smaller form may move with greater ease and require less energy to sustain itself, yet it faces different constraints. Access to certain prey becomes limited, and the ability to exert control within an encounter diminishes. The range of possible strategies narrows, shaped by the need to avoid larger competitors and the inability to secure higher energy resources. Survival remains possible, but influence within the system is reduced, and the role occupied differs in both scale and effect. Between these boundaries lies a form that avoids both extremes. Its size supports access to prey that provides substantial energy, while remaining within a range that allows efficient movement and manageable energy demands. This balance does not eliminate risk, but it distributes it in a way that can be navigated across varying conditions. The body becomes capable of responding to change without requiring complete reliance on any single factor. This balance is reflected in the relationship between intake and expenditure. Energy gained from a successful hunt sustains activity over extended periods, while the cost of movement remains controlled enough to allow flexibility in timing and location. The body does not require constant feeding, yet it is capable of acting decisively when opportunity arises. This rhythm supports a strategy built on selectivity rather than frequency, aligning with the broader patterns that define its environment. Adaptability emerges from this equilibrium. When prey shifts position or availability, the body retains the capacity to adjust its range and behavior without exceeding its own limits. When temperatures change, internal systems maintain performance within a range that remains effective. Each feature supports a form of resilience that depends not on specialization alone, but on the ability to operate across different conditions without loss of function. Over long periods, this alignment becomes reinforced through evolutionary pressure. Forms that drift too far toward either extreme encounter constraints that limit their persistence, while those within the balanced range continue to pass their traits forward. The result is a consistency in size that reflects not a lack of variation, but a narrowing toward what remains effective over time. Within this range, survivability is not tied to dominance in a single moment, but to continuity across many. The body remains capable without excess, efficient without fragility, and responsive without dependence on narrow conditions. This combination allows it to maintain its place within a changing system, where conditions rarely remain fixed. In this way, size becomes less a measure of power and more a reflection of fit. The form that persists is the one that aligns most closely with the demands of its environment, occupying a space where strength, efficiency, and adaptability converge into a stable, enduring presence. Across modern oceans, pressure arrives not as a single force, but as a series of overlapping influences that alter patterns once shaped only by climate and ecology. These influences do not always announce themselves clearly. They move through the system in quieter ways, changing availability, interrupting movement, and reducing numbers without immediate visibility. One of the most persistent of these pressures comes from bycatch, where animals are unintentionally captured in fishing gear set for other species. Long lines extend across large distances, carrying thousands of baited hooks, while nets drift or remain anchored, intercepting movement along established routes. Within these systems, encounters are not selective. A predator moving through its normal range can become entangled or hooked, unable to escape once contact is made. The impact accumulates gradually, each loss reducing the presence in ways that may not be immediately apparent at the surface. Alongside this, overfishing alters the structure of the food web itself. Species that once formed a reliable part of the prey base decline under sustained harvest, shifting the balance of energy within the system. As these populations decrease, the distribution of remaining prey changes, sometimes becoming more scattered or less predictable. This forces adjustments in movement and feeding, increasing the effort required to locate sufficient resources. The effect is indirect, yet it extends through multiple layers, influencing behavior without direct interaction. The history of the fin trade adds another dimension to this pressure. For many years, sharks were targeted for their fins, which hold high value in certain markets. In some cases, individuals were captured, their fins removed, and the remaining body discarded. This practice reduced populations rapidly in regions where it was widespread, leaving gaps that extended beyond the immediate loss of individuals. Even where regulations have since been introduced, the legacy of these removals continues to shape population structure. Recovery from such impacts unfolds slowly, shaped by the same biological patterns that define the species. Growth takes time, maturity is reached after many years, and reproduction occurs in limited numbers. These factors, which support stability under natural conditions, also limit the speed at which populations can rebuild after decline. Each generation replaces only a portion of what was lost, and the process of recovery extends across decades rather than years. Within this context, the ocean continues to operate as it always has, currents moving, prey shifting, and ecosystems responding to change. Yet the presence within it becomes less dense, more fragmented, as pressures accumulate across different regions. In some areas, sightings become less frequent, while in others, patterns shift without clear explanation, reflecting underlying changes that are not immediately visible. These influences do not act in isolation. Bycatch, overfishing, and historical exploitation interact with one another, creating conditions that can amplify their effects. A reduction in prey may increase the likelihood of encountering fishing gear, while decreased numbers make each loss more significant. The system adjusts, but the adjustments occur within a narrower range, shaped by constraints that were not present before. Despite these pressures, continuity remains. Individuals persist, moving through the same pathways, following patterns that have formed over long periods. Their presence continues to shape the environments they inhabit, even as their numbers fluctuate. The balance of the system holds, though altered, reflecting both resilience and limitation. In this way, modern threats do not erase what has developed over millions of years, but they influence how it continues. The ocean absorbs these changes as it does others, integrating them into the ongoing movement of life within it. Change begins quietly, often without a clear boundary, separating what came before from what follows. In recent decades, a different pattern has started to take shape along certain coastlines, not through natural shifts alone, but through deliberate efforts to reduce pressure and allow recovery to unfold at its own pace. These efforts do not alter the fundamental nature of the ocean, yet they influence how its inhabitants persist within it. Legal protections form one layer of this shift. In multiple regions, regulations have been introduced that restrict or prohibit the capture of large sharks, recognizing their role within marine ecosystems and the limitations of their reproductive cycles. These protections vary in scope, from complete bans to controlled measures that reduce incidental harm. Their effect is gradual, allowing individuals that would once have been removed to continue moving through their range, contributing to the continuity of the population over time. Alongside these measures, marine protected areas establish zones where human activity is limited or managed to reduce disturbance. These areas often encompass key habitats, places where feeding, migration, or early development occur with greater frequency. Within their boundaries, the structure of the ecosystem remains more intact, supporting the relationships that define the presence of large predators. Movement through these zones continues, as it always has, yet with fewer interruptions, allowing patterns to persist across seasons and years. At the same time, advances in research have expanded understanding in ways that were not previously possible. Tagging technologies, refined over successive generations, now provide detailed insights into movement, behavior, and environmental interaction. Satellite and acoustic tags record positions, depth changes, and temperature preferences, creating a layered picture of how individuals navigate the ocean. This information does not remain abstract. It informs management decisions, guiding the placement of protected areas and the timing of conservation measures to align more closely with natural patterns. Through these combined efforts, subtle signs of stabilization begin to appear. In certain regions, sightings become more consistent, with individuals returning to known locations over multiple years. Patterns that had become fragmented show signs of reestablishing, not as a sudden increase, but as a steady presence that holds across time. Juvenile individuals appear within nursery areas, suggesting that reproduction continues to contribute to the population despite past pressures. These changes do not indicate a full recovery, nor do they remove the challenges that remain. Instead, they reflect a shift in trajectory, where decline slows and, in some cases, begins to reverse. The pace of this process remains tied to the biology of the species, unfolding over long periods that extend beyond immediate observation. Each individual that persists carries forward the possibility of future continuity, linking present conditions to what may come later. Within the ocean, the response to these efforts integrates with existing dynamics. Prey continues to move, currents maintain their influence, and ecological relationships adjust as they always have. The difference lies in the reduction of external pressure, allowing natural processes to operate with fewer interruptions. This creates space for patterns that were once disrupted to re-emerge, gradually restoring elements of the system that had been diminished. In this way, conservation does not impose a new order, but supports the continuation of an existing one. It aligns human activity with the rhythms of the ocean, creating conditions where presence can stabilize and, over time, strengthen. The outcome remains quiet, measured not in sudden change, but in the persistence of movement across seasons that follow one another without interruption. The temperature of the ocean is not rising evenly, but in shifting layers that move across regions and depths, altering patterns that have held for long periods. These changes do not arrive all at once. They unfold gradually, carried by currents that redistribute heat and reshape the boundaries that once defined where certain forms of life could persist. As waters warm, prey species begin to adjust their ranges, following conditions that remain within their tolerances. Some move toward higher latitudes, where cooler temperatures still support their needs. Others shift in depth, seeking layers where the balance between warmth and oxygen remains stable. These movements do not occur in isolation. Each adjustment influences the layers above and below, creating a chain of responses that extends through the entire system. For predators that rely on specific prey, these shifts introduce a new variability. Routes that once led consistently to feeding grounds begin to change, requiring adjustments in movement and timing. The patterns that shaped presence along certain coastlines may weaken or relocate as the distribution of prey no longer aligns with previous conditions. What was once predictable becomes more fluid, guided by changes that are still unfolding. Warming also affects the structure of the ocean itself. Stratification increases in some regions, with warmer surface layers separating more distinctly from cooler waters below. This can limit the upward movement of nutrients, reducing productivity in areas that once supported dense networks of life. In other regions, altered wind patterns and currents may intensify upwelling, creating localized increases in activity. The result is a patchwork of conditions, where some areas become more productive while others decline. Within this shifting landscape, adaptability becomes increasingly important. The ability to move across a range of temperatures and adjust to changing prey distributions offers a degree of resilience. Yet, even this flexibility has limits, shaped by the speed and extent of environmental change. If conditions shift faster than patterns can adjust, mismatches may occur, where predators arrive in regions that no longer support the prey they depend on. Seasonal cycles, once relatively stable, also begin to shift. The timing of migrations, breeding, and feeding may change as temperature cues alter the signals that guide these behaviors. This can create overlaps or gaps that were not present before, affecting how different species interact within the system. The alignment between predator and prey becomes less consistent, introducing a level of uncertainty that influences success over time. Despite these changes, the structure of the ocean remains dynamic rather than fixed. New patterns begin to form as organisms adjust, creating different configurations of presence and absence. Some regions may emerge as new centers of activity, while others lose the conditions that once supported them. The system reorganizes, guided by the same principles of energy flow and adaptation, but within a changing framework. The stability of the top position within this system depends on how well these adjustments can be made. It is not secured by past success, but by continued alignment with the conditions that define the present. As the environment shifts, so too must the patterns that support dominance, maintaining a balance between energy, movement, and opportunity. Within a warming ocean, the future remains open, shaped by changes that are still in motion. The pathways that define presence will continue to evolve, reflecting the ongoing interaction between organisms and their environment. The structure of the system endures, yet its details are rewritten over time, guided by forces that extend beyond any single species. Light begins to soften as the sun lowers, not disappearing at once, but thinning into longer bands that stretch across the water. Colors fade toward muted tones, and the surface reflects a dimming sky that gradually loses its clarity. Beneath this changing light, a single form moves through a column of water where temperature and depth create subtle layers, each holding its own texture and resistance. The body settles within one of these layers, where warmth from above meets cooler currents rising from below. This boundary does not appear as a visible line, yet it can be felt through slight changes in density and flow. Movement here requires less adjustment, allowing the body to remain suspended with minimal effort. The surrounding water carries faint gradients that guide position, holding the form in a space where energy is conserved. Above, the surface begins to shift, with the activity of seals returning from their feeding grounds. Their movements create brief interruptions in the fading light, shadows crossing the upper boundary in irregular patterns. Each silhouette stretches and contracts with the motion of waves, never fully stable, yet distinct enough to mark presence. From below, these shapes are reduced to contrast, darker forms moving across a field that continues to dim. The shark maintains its position, adjusting only slightly as these patterns pass overhead. There is no immediate response, only a quiet alignment between depth and angle, ensuring that the surface remains within a narrow field of view. The body remains still enough that surrounding currents move past without disturbance, blending it into the water that holds it. Within this stillness, internal processes continue at a steady pace. Muscles remain ready, without tension, supported by retained warmth that prevents the slowing effect of the cooling environment. Circulation distributes this heat where it is needed, maintaining a balance that allows immediate response without the need for preparation. The body exists in a state between rest and action, held in readiness without visible motion. As light continues to fade, the contrast above becomes sharper. Shadows deepen against the remaining brightness, making movement more defined within a narrower range of visibility. The silhouettes of seals grow clearer in their outline, though detail remains limited. Their paths cross and diverge, forming a shifting pattern that changes with each passing moment. The shark adjusts its depth slightly, aligning more precisely beneath one of these moving forms. The distance is measured not in fixed units, but in the clarity of the silhouette and the rate at which it moves across the field above. The body remains composed, holding position as the alignment becomes more exact. Water around it carries faint signals, pressure changes, and small disturbances that accompany movement at the surface. These cues merge with visual information, creating a layered sense of position that narrows the focus toward a single path. The surrounding field becomes quieter, not in sound, but in the reduction of irrelevant signals as attention centers on a specific point. Time compresses within this alignment. What had been a continuous flow of motion above resolves into a single trajectory, one that moves steadily across the narrowing frame. The body beneath remains still, conserving the energy that will soon be released. At the boundary between stillness and motion, nothing outward changes. The water remains calm, the surface continues its gentle movement, and the fading light holds its final balance. Yet within the body, the conditions have aligned completely, bringing together position, timing, and readiness into a single, silent moment that precedes what follows. The moment begins without visible signal, a transition so subtle that the surrounding water carries no warning. Within the body, however, stillness gives way to motion, stored energy released through a sequence that unfolds with exact coordination. Muscles contract in rapid succession, each movement building upon the last, directing force upward along a path already set. Acceleration forms quickly, compressing time into a narrow interval where distance closes faster than perception can adjust. The tail drives with increasing amplitude, pushing against the water with strokes that translate into forward momentum. Resistance gathers along the body, then yields as speed rises, allowing the form to move through the column with growing intensity. Above, the surface remains unaware, its shifting patterns continuing without interruption. The alignment between predator and prey has already reached its final stage where reaction becomes secondary to motion. The distance that once separated them is reduced to a brief span, measured not in space alone, but in fractions of time that pass too quickly to alter outcome. As the body approaches the boundary between water and air, pressure builds along its leading edge. The surface, which had appeared as a soft and shifting plane from below, now becomes a thin barrier that yields under force. Water parts around the advancing form, rising outward in a brief arc as the body breaks through. For an instant, motion continues beyond the surface, carrying the entire form into open air. The transition from water to air alters the resistance that had shaped the ascent, allowing momentum to extend further than it would within the denser medium below. Droplets scatter outward, suspended momentarily before beginning their descent. The surrounding space, briefly occupied by this movement, holds the trace of what has just occurred. At the peak of this motion, upward force begins to diminish. Gravity, constant and unchanging, asserts itself as the body reaches the limit of its ascent. The arc slows, then reverses, guiding the form back toward the surface it has just crossed. The return is not abrupt, but follows the same path in reverse, shaped by the balance between momentum and weight. Re-entry carries its own sequence. The body meets the surface with force, displacing water outward and downward. The impact creates a brief disturbance that expands in concentric patterns, each wave moving away from the point of contact. Beneath the surface, the water absorbs the returning form, closing around it and restoring continuity. Within this sequence, the interaction itself remains brief. The initial contact, made during the ascent, has already achieved its purpose. The predator does not remain at the surface, nor does it linger in open air beyond what momentum allows. The motion resolves quickly, returning the body to the medium where control is most complete. As the disturbance fades, the surface settles back into its previous state, ripples diminish, and the patterns of light and shadow resume their steady movement. The space that held the breach becomes indistinguishable from the surrounding water, carrying no lasting mark of the event. Below, motion slows once more. The body returns to a state of controlled movement, energy expended, and outcome secured. The sequence that began in stillness has completed its cycle, leaving only the quiet continuation of the surrounding environment. In this way, the breach exists as a brief intersection between two states, stillness and motion, water and air, preparation and release. It unfolds within a narrow span of time, then resolves without residue, absorbed back into the ongoing flow of the ocean. What remains after motion settles does not vanish, but begins to drift, carried by currents that move more slowly than the events that created it. Near the surface, fragments separate from the original form, buoyed by their composition, spreading outward in irregular shapes. The water holds them briefly in place, then begins to draw them apart, tracing faint paths that extend beyond the point of contact. Among these fragments, blubber rises most readily, its density allowing it to remain suspended near the upper layers. It catches what little light remains, reflecting it in muted tones that shift with the movement of the surface. The surrounding water carries the scent and trace of organic material, signals that disperse outward and downward, moving through gradients that extend far beyond the immediate area. These signals do not remain unnoticed. From deeper levels, movement begins to gather, subtle at first, then more defined as distance closes. Fish approach in scattered groups, their paths converging toward the source. Some remain cautious, circling at the edges before moving closer, while others enter more directly, responding to the availability of energy that has entered the water. As time passes, additional forms arrive, each drawn by the same cues, yet interacting with the remains in different ways. Smaller predators and opportunistic feeders move through the area, taking portions that match their size and capacity. Their presence does not disrupt the process, but contributes to it, reducing what remains and redistributing it through the system. Within this gathering, feeding unfolds without urgency. Each movement is measured, shaped by the availability of material and the presence of others. There is no prolonged struggle, no contest that extends beyond brief adjustments in position. The structure of the event has already determined the outcome, leaving only the distribution of what remains. The initial removal of high-energy tissue has already served its purpose, providing the primary gain for the predator that initiated the sequence. What follows is a secondary phase, where the remaining energy is transferred through other layers of the ecosystem. Each participant contributes to this transfer, converting what is available into movement, growth, and continuation. As the fragments diminish, the density of activity begins to thin. Individuals that arrived earlier move away, returning to their previous paths as the immediate resource declines. The water gradually clears, carrying away smaller particles that dissolve into the surrounding environment. What remains becomes less distinct, blending into the broader system from which it emerged. Below, the larger form has already moved away from the surface, descending into deeper water where light fades and temperature stabilizes. Movement slows, returning to a steady rhythm that reflects the completion of the event. The energy gained will be used gradually, supporting activity over time without immediate need for repetition. This transition back into depth marks a return to the broader pattern of existence, where moments of action are spaced by longer intervals of stillness. The body carries forward what it has acquired, integrating it into ongoing movement without visible change. Above, the surface resumes its continuous motion, shaped by wind and current rather than the brief disturbance that has already passed. The traces of the event disperse, leaving no fixed boundary between what occurred and what continues. Within this cycle, the aftermath does not represent an end, but a redistribution, where energy moves from one form to another, sustaining the system in ways that extend beyond the initial encounter. Not all influence in the ocean is expressed through motion. Much of it exists in what does not happen, in paths not taken, in moments where movement hesitates or turns aside before reaching a certain space. This absence is not random. It forms around the quiet awareness of something that may be there, even when it is not seen. In regions where large predators are known to move, the behavior of other species begins to reflect a different kind of boundary. Areas that once held consistent activity become less frequented at certain times, while others see increased use as movement shifts away from perceived risk. These changes do not require direct encounters. The memory of presence, carried through repeated interactions, is enough to shape how individuals navigate their environment. This form of regulation operates without continuous action. A predator does not need to hunt constantly to influence the system around it. The possibility of its arrival alters decisions made by prey, affecting where they gather, how long they remain, and when they choose to move. These decisions accumulate across individuals, forming patterns that extend beyond any single moment. Within these patterns, energy flows differently. When prey avoid certain areas, the organisms they would have consumed may increase locally, while in other regions, feeding pressure intensifies. This redistribution creates a balance that is maintained not through direct control, but through the adjustment of behavior across multiple levels. The predator becomes a guiding presence, shaping outcomes without needing to act in every instance. Behavioral dominance emerges from this dynamic. It is not defined by constant engagement, but by the ability to influence the actions of others through presence alone. Prey species develop responses that reduce exposure, altering their routines in ways that reflect an ongoing assessment of risk. These responses can include tighter group formations, changes in depth, or shifts in timing that move activity away from periods of higher vulnerability. Over time, these adjustments become integrated into the broader behavior of the population. Individuals that respond effectively are more likely to persist, passing on patterns that align with survival under these conditions. The result is a system where behavior itself becomes shaped by the presence of the predator, extending its influence beyond direct interaction. This process reflects a form of ecological psychology where perception plays a central role in shaping action. Prey do not respond only to immediate threats, but to the expectation of them, guided by cues that signal potential risk. The environment becomes layered with meaning, certain areas associated with safety, others with caution, even in the absence of visible danger. Within this framework, the predator occupies a position that is both physical and perceptual. Its movement through the environment leaves behind more than a trail. It creates a pattern of awareness that persists after it has passed. This awareness influences decisions made at multiple levels, from individual movement to group behavior, shaping the structure of the ecosystem in subtle yet consistent ways. The effect of this presence does not rely on frequency of action, but on the reliability of the signal it represents. As long as the possibility of encounter remains, behavior continues to adjust in response. The system maintains its balance through these adjustments, with each layer responding to the conditions created by those above and below. In this way, power within the ocean is often quiet, expressed not through constant force, but through the steady shaping of behavior. Presence becomes a form of influence that extends beyond direct interaction, guiding the flow of life through patterns that remain largely unseen. Across shifting oceans, outcomes are rarely determined by a single trait. They emerge from the alignment of many factors, each unfolding within its own rhythm, until at certain moments those rhythms intersect. When they do, a path opens that favors one form over another, not through sudden force, but through a gradual convergence of conditions that support its presence. Timing plays a central role in this convergence. Changes in climate alter the distribution of life, reshaping where energy gathers and how it moves through the system. As waters cooled and reorganized, the structure of marine ecosystems shifted in ways that created new opportunities. These changes did not occur in isolation, but coincided with the emergence of a form already carrying traits suited to these conditions. The alignment between environmental change and biological capability created a window in which adaptation could take hold. Adaptation itself does not arrive fully formed. It develops through incremental adjustments, each one refining how the organism interacts with its surroundings. Over time, these refinements produce a body and behavior that match the demands of the environment with increasing precision. The ability to operate effectively within cooler waters, to move efficiently along coastlines, and to engage with prey that offers concentrated energy all reflect this gradual process. Each trait contributes to a larger pattern, one that becomes more stable as conditions continue to favor it. Energy strategy reinforces this alignment. The shift toward prey that provides high caloric return allows for a form of survival that depends on fewer, more efficient encounters. This reduces the need for constant movement and lowers exposure to risk, while supporting sustained activity over longer periods. The balance between energy gained and energy spent becomes more favorable, allowing the organism to maintain its position within the system without relying on excess. Climate alignment further shapes this outcome. The expansion of temperate zones, with their productive coastal regions and consistent prey availability, creates a setting where these adaptations can be expressed fully. Within these environments, the interplay between temperature, currents, and biological activity supports a structure that matches the capabilities of the organism. Movement through these regions becomes both possible and advantageous, reinforcing the patterns that sustain its presence. These factors do not operate independently. Timing influences which adaptations become effective, while energy strategy determines how those adaptations are used within the available environment. Climate shapes the distribution of both prey and habitat, creating the conditions in which these interactions unfold. Together, they form a network of influences that guide the emergence of dominance, not as a fixed state, but as a dynamic relationship between organism and environment. The absence of previous forms, shaped by conditions that no longer persist, contributes to this process by opening space within the system. Yet, it is not absence alone that determines the outcome. The presence that fills this space must align with the new structure, capable of operating within its constraints, while taking advantage of its opportunities. This alignment defines the transition, allowing one form to become established where another could not continue. Over time, the convergence of these elements stabilizes into a pattern that appears consistent, though it remains dependent on the conditions that created it. The position at the top of the system is not secured by permanence, but by ongoing compatibility with the environment. As long as this compatibility holds, the structure remains intact. In this way, the rise to dominance reflects a meeting of factors that extend beyond any single trait. It is shaped by timing, refined through adaptation, sustained by efficient use of energy, and supported by the broader patterns of climate that define the ocean itself. Nothing in the ocean remains fixed for long, not even positions that appear stable across generations. The balance that supports a dominant presence depends on conditions that continue to shift, sometimes slowly, sometimes with increasing pace. When these conditions change beyond certain limits, the alignment that once sustained that position begins to loosen. Competition forms one part of this shifting balance. Other predators move through the same environments, each carrying its own strategies and adaptations. When their presence overlaps, interactions reshape patterns that had previously settled into consistency. These interactions do not always take the form of direct conflict. They can emerge through displacement, where one presence alters the movement of another, or through shared reliance on the same prey, increasing pressure on limited resources. As these pressures develop, the structure of the ecosystem adjusts. Prey distributions may shift under increased demand, reducing availability in areas that once supported stable patterns. Movement becomes less predictable, requiring greater effort to locate sufficient energy. The balance between intake and expenditure begins to narrow, not through a single cause, but through the combined effect of multiple influences acting at once. Environmental change adds another layer to this process. As temperature patterns continue to evolve, the conditions that define productive regions shift accordingly. Areas that once provided reliable support may lose their stability, while others emerge in different locations. These transitions are not always gradual. Sudden changes in current strength, nutrient flow, or seasonal timing can alter the structure of entire regions within relatively short periods. Within this changing framework, the ability to adapt becomes critical, yet adaptation itself is shaped by limits. The rate at which conditions change may exceed the pace at which behavioral or physiological adjustments can occur. When this happens, mismatches develop between the needs of the organism and the resources available within its environment. These mismatches can persist, reducing effectiveness over time. Human influence intersects with these natural processes, adding pressures that operate on different scales. Fishing activity continues to affect both the predators themselves and the prey they depend on. Even where direct capture is reduced, incidental interactions with fishing gear remain a source of loss. At the same time, alterations to coastal environments influence habitats that support key stages of life, affecting development and long-term stability. Pollution and changes in water quality introduce additional variables, altering the conditions under which organisms must operate. These changes can affect sensory systems, prey availability, and overall health, contributing to a gradual weakening of patterns that once held steady. Each factor alone may seem limited, yet together they create a cumulative effect that extends across the system. Within this convergence of influences, the position at the top becomes less certain. It is not removed suddenly, but begins to shift as the balance that supported it becomes more difficult to maintain. Movement patterns adjust. Presence becomes less concentrated in certain areas, and the interactions that once reinforced dominance begin to change. The ocean continues to reorganize itself in response to these pressures, forming new patterns that reflect the conditions of the present. The space at the top of the system remains, yet who occupies it depends on the ability to align with these evolving conditions. This alignment is not guaranteed, nor is it permanent. In this way, The position that was once established through timing, adaptation, and efficiency remains subject to the same forces that shaped it. As those forces change, so too does the structure they support, carrying the possibility that what holds today may not hold in the same way tomorrow. Across the present ocean, patterns of movement continue to be traced not only by what is seen, but by what is recorded in quiet streams of data. Signals travel from distant waters to receivers on shore, marking positions that shift over days, seasons, and years. These traces form a map that is never fully complete, yet gradually reveals how a single species moves within a vast and changing system. Within this emerging picture, the role of the great white remains defined by influence rather than constant action. Its presence intersects with regions where energy concentrates, especially along coastlines shaped by currents that bring nutrients upward. In these areas, interactions with marine mammals continue to shape behavior, guiding where groups gather and how they move through open water. The predator does not occupy every space, yet its movement creates a framework that others respond to, maintaining patterns that extend beyond direct encounters. Research now follows these movements with increasing precision. Tags attached to individuals transmit depth, temperature, and location, allowing scientists to observe paths that once remained hidden. These records show journeys that extend across entire ocean basins, linking distant regions into a connected network of movement. Periods of coastal presence alternate with long passages through open water, suggesting rhythms that are not immediately visible from any single location. In addition to movement, other aspects of behavior are being studied through observation and technology. Feeding patterns, social tolerance, and responses to environmental change are examined through a combination of direct encounters and remote sensing. Each method contributes a fragment of understanding, building a layered view of how the species interacts with its environment. Yet even as these details accumulate, the full picture remains incomplete. Certain questions persist without clear answers. The purpose of extended open ocean gatherings, observed through repeated tagging data, continues to be explored. These areas, far from coastlines and apparent feeding grounds, suggest behaviors that are not fully understood. The timing and function of these movements may relate to reproduction, navigation, or other processes that have yet to be clearly defined. Reproduction itself remains difficult to observe directly. Nursery areas are identified through patterns of juvenile presence, yet the locations where mating occurs are largely unknown. The early stages of life, carried out in environments that are not easily accessed, leave only indirect evidence for scientists to interpret. Growth rates, lifespan, and population dynamics are better understood than before, yet still contain uncertainties that influence how the species is managed and protected. Environmental change adds further complexity to this understanding. As conditions shift, the patterns observed today may not remain stable, requiring continuous observation to track how behavior adjusts. What is known becomes a reference point rather than a fixed description, guiding future study as new data emerges. Despite these uncertainties, a clearer sense of the present role has formed. The great white exists as part of a system that is both structured and fluid, influencing and responding to changes that occur across multiple scales. Its movements connect regions, its presence shapes behavior, and its survival reflects the balance between adaptation and environment. In the quiet accumulation of data and observation, knowledge continues to grow, not as a complete image, but as a series of evolving patterns. Each discovery adds depth to what is understood, while also revealing the limits of current insight. The ocean remains vast, and within it, Much of what guides these movements continues to unfold beyond direct view. There are moments in the ocean that pass without sound or spectacle, where change settles into place so gradually it feels as though it has always been there. The shape of dominance, once formed, does not announce itself. It becomes part of the background structure, guiding movement and interaction in ways that rarely draw attention to their origin. The path that led here did not unfold in a single shift. It emerged through overlapping changes that aligned over time, each one subtle on its own, yet together forming a new configuration. Extinction removed what could no longer persist, not through sudden absence, but through a fading that left space behind. Climate reshaped the boundaries of that space, altering the conditions that defined where life could gather and how it could move. Opportunity followed these changes, not as a separate force, but as the result of their interaction, creating openings that could be occupied by those able to match them. Within this convergence, the rise of a new dominant presence remained quiet. It did not require a display of size beyond all others, nor a constant assertion of force. Instead, it reflected a precise alignment between form and environment, where movement, energy use, and behavior fit the structure that had taken shape. This alignment allowed presence to expand naturally into the available space, guided by conditions rather than driven by confrontation. The ocean's structure does not hold such positions indefinitely. It continues to shift, influenced by forces that operate across scales of time and space. What appears stable within one interval may begin to change as those forces evolve, altering the balance that once supported it. The concept of a fixed throne does not apply here. Position is always conditional, dependent on the ability to remain aligned with the system as it continues to transform. Adaptation becomes the quiet thread that connects these transitions. It does not act in isolation, but responds to the same influences that shape the environment itself. As conditions shift, forms that can adjust their movement, behavior, and interaction with energy maintain their place within the structure. Those that cannot gradually lose alignment, their presence diminishing as the system reorganizes around new patterns. For now, within temperate waters shaped by currents and seasonal rhythms, a familiar form continues to move with steady purpose. Its passage does not disturb the surface for long, nor does it leave a lasting mark that defines its presence. It exists within the flow of the system, influencing and responding in equal measure, its role sustained by the conditions that support it. It is not defined by extremes. Its size does not exceed all others, nor does its lineage extend further back than every form around it. What defines it is the precision with which it fits the present, each aspect of its design aligned with the opportunities available within this era. Movement, sensing, and energy use combine into a pattern that allows it to operate effectively within the structure that has formed. Beneath the surface, power continues to express itself in this quiet way. It does not rely on constant display, but on the steady shaping of interactions that ripple outward through the system. The rise that placed it here remains embedded in the conditions that made it possible, and the future of that position rests within the same ongoing process of change.